Hey, tonight we're drifting out to sea not on cruise ships or fishing boats, but on vessels that were found eerily empty. No crew, no passengers, just silence. And sometimes, signs that something had gone terribly wrong. We're exploring the world of ghost ships, from 18th century schooners found perfectly intact with meals still set on the table, to modern freighters floating aimlessly with no one at the helm. Some have explanations, others, they just defy logic. If you're into this kind of late-night journey through the strange and unsettling, drop a like or hit subscribe. It really helps keep this going. And hey, I always love knowing where you're listening from. Drop your city and local time in the comments. Let's build this little global campfire together. Now dim the lights, close your eyes if you're ready, and let the soft creak of waves carry you. Because tonight, we're setting sail through every ghost ship ever found and the mysteries that still cling to them. The Mary Celeste is the kind of story sailors tell when the sea is calm, the rum is flowing, and the stars are a little too bright. It's the story of a perfectly sound ship, found drifting in the Atlantic in 1872 with no sign of struggle, no major damage, and not a single soul aboard. Not dead, not alive, just gone. It's a story so eerie, so quiet in its devastation, that it has haunted maritime history ever since. And the details? They only make it weirder. Let's start with the basics. The Mary Celeste was a 100-foot brigantine built in Nova Scotia and captained on this particular voyage by Benjamin Brigsa, respected, religious, teetotaling New England seaman who brought along his wife Sarah and their 2-year-old daughter Sophia. The rest of the crew were hand-picked, experienced sailors, known quantities, no troublemakers. The ship left New York on November 7, 1872, bound for Genoa, Italy, with 701 barrels of denatured alcohol sloshing below deck. Not the kind of stuff you'd want to drink, but very much the kind of stuff you'd want to keep sealed and far away from open flames. Meanwhile, another ship, the Dei Gratia, left a week later on the same route. On December 5, somewhere in the eastern Atlantic, the Dei Gratia spotted the Mary Celeste, drifting aimlessly, no distress signals, sails partially set. The ship moving slowly, oddly, like it didn't know it had been left behind. So the crew of the Dei Gratia did what sailors do: they boarded. What they found was a portrait of frozen absence. The lifeboat was missing, yes, but the cargo was mostly intact. The ship was seaworthy. The captain's logbook was still on board. The last entry dated 10 days earlier. The crew's belongings were untouched. Food stores were abundant. And the weirdest part? There were no signs of violence, no blood, no fire, no water damage. The cabin was neat. The galley was stocked. There was even a sewing machine with a half-mended garment still on it, as if someone had just stepped away for a moment and never came back. The image that caught the public imagination, thanks to some generous embellishment, was that of a warm breakfast left on the table, steam still rising from untouched mugs. That part's probably fiction, but it hardly matters. The real story was strange enough. A full crew, a loving family, all vanished in the middle of the ocean on a clear, manageable day. The theories started immediately. Some said pirates, but nothing was stolen. Some said mutiny, but there was no struggle. Others blamed waterspouts, which could maybe explain damage to the sails and rigging, but not the eerie absence of people. There was speculation about alcohol fumes from the cargo leaking and causing the crew to panic, abandoning ship for fear of an explosion that never came. That one sounds plausible, except the hatches were mostly sealed, and even a panicked evacuation doesn't explain why no one ever made it back, or why their lifeboat was never found. Then, of course, came the supernatural angles. Sea monsters, ghosts, a cursed voyage, aliens, the Bermuda Triangle. Even though this wasn't the Bermuda Triangle, humans love mystery, and the Mary Celeste handed them one in a gilded frame. There was also a more cynical theory, insurance fraud, but if that was the case, it was terribly executed. Briggs was financially stable, the cargo was intact, and the De Gratia's crew had nothing to gain. They received only a modest salvage reward and were put through rigorous questioning in Gibraltar that nearly accused them of piracy themselves. Ultimately, they were exonerated, but no one left that courtroom feeling any closer to the truth. In the centuries since, the Mary Celeste has become a floating metaphor for absence, for mystery, for the kind of blank space that drives people nuts trying to fill it. Dozens of books, movies, and TV episodes have taken inspiration from her story. Arthur Conan Doyle even wrote a fictionalized account where the crew is murdered by a vengeful ex-Slavia story so convincing that it was mistaken for fact by many and muddied the waters for years. The real ship didn't fare much better. After her ghostly discovery, the Mary Celeste was sold and changed hands several times. It turns out people don't like sailing on boats famous for swallowing their crew. She limped along in commercial service until 1885, when her final owner tried to run her aground on purpose for an insurance scam. She broke apart off the coast of Haiti, her bones finally giving in to the weight of rumor and time. But the legend? That lived on. Because the Mary Celeste isn't just a ship anymore. She's a story, a ghost in a bottle, a question with no answer that whispers back across the water every time someone leaves port. What happened to Captain Briggs and his family? What unspeakable thing did they see, or believe they saw, that made them get into a small boat in the middle of the ocean and disappear? We'll probably never know. That's the cruel poetry of it. All the evidence points to something mundane: a storm, a leak, a mistake. And yet, it's the lack of proof, the silence where explanation should be, that makes it feel bigger than it is. The crew could have been rescued. They could have perished quietly. They could have ended up anywhere in that massive blue nothing. But what we're left with isn't their fate. It's the ship itself adrift, abandoned and unsettlingly intact. The Mary Celeste is what happens when the ocean keeps a secret, when everything looks fine except that it isn't, when people vanish not in chaos but in eerie order. It's not the splash that haunts you, it's the calm afterward, and that folded laundry, just sitting there, waiting for someone who never came back. In the pantheon of maritime horror stories, few are as chilling gore, as persistently unexplained as the legend of the SS Orang Medan. It's the kind of tale you hear late at night, halfway between a campfire ghost story and a Navy intelligence report. A cargo ship found drifting somewhere in the waters of the Strait of Malacca, its crew dead under bizarre and grotesque circumstances, their faces twisted in terror, arms raised in defensive postures as if trying to fend off something that didn't leave a scratch. Then, before investigators could unravel the truth, the ship exploded, just vanished in a puff of smoke and fire. It's a nautical mic drop that's puzzled the curious for over 70 years. The details are a cocktail of horror and hearsay. It starts sometime around 1947, or 1948, or 1940 depending on who you ask, when an American ship reportedly picked up a series of increasingly disturbing SOS messages from a Dutch cargo vessel called the Orang Medan, Man from Medan. The first message was fragmented but urgent. All officers, including captain, are dead, lying in chart room and bridge. Possibly whole crew dead. Then came a final, jumbled transmission. I die. And then radio silence. A nearby American merchant ship, usually named in the story as the Silver Star, responded. When her crew boarded the Orang Medan, they were met with a scene that feels ripped from a fever dream. The entire crew sprawled across the decks and passageways, eyes open, mouths frozen mid-scream, limbs twisted, as if caught mid-struggle with something invisible. The ship was quiet too, quiet. Even the ship's dog, they say, was found dead, fangs bared at something that wasn't there. No wounds, no obvious cause of death, no survivors. And here's the kicker. Before the rescuers could tow the ship back to port or even document the macabre tableau properly, smoke began to rise from the hold. The boarding party barely made it back to their own ship before the Orang Medan exploded and sank beneath the wave, taking its secrets and corpses with it. Now, this is the part of the story where skeptics and sailors start side-eyeing each other over their mugs, because the facts, they're wobbly. There's no official record of the Orang Medan in maritime registries. No paperwork, no logs, no verifiable crew manifest. The Silver Star existed, but was it ever near the Strait of Malacca in the late 40s? That depends on who you ask. Some researchers have tried to trace the story to a 1952 U.S. Coast Guard report in a Dutch newspaper. Others think it was a Cold War ghost story, wrapped in an anti-chemical weapons PSA. Which brings us to theory number 1. The Orang Medan was smuggling chemicals. The most popular version claims the ship was carrying a cocktail of nitroglycerin and potassium cyanide, perhaps a more exotic nerve agent being illegally transported from China or Germany. A leak in the cargo hold could have poisoned the crew with fumes and made the entire ship a floating time bomb. That might explain the horrific expressions and sudden combustion. But it doesn't explain the "I die" radio message, or the fact that the crew died on deck, as if trying to escape something below. Then there's the supernatural theory. Ghosts, aliens. Some say the ship passed through a time rift, or was cursed, or boarded by something beyond human understanding. These theories usually involve ominous terms like phantom ship or death fog. And look, it's easy to roll your eyes, but the way this story is told, with all its foggy uncertainties, strange deaths, and sudden explosions, it practically invites the paranormal to take a seat. A slightly less dramatic theory: carbon monoxide poisoning. A fire in the engine room could have emitted odorless gas that killed the crew slowly, painfully, with just enough time for them to reach the deck and die mid-scream. But again, where's the fire? And why did the ship explode only when help arrived? The lack of concrete evidence makes this story both maddening and seductive. If you're the kind of person who wants hard data, the Orang Medan will give you migraines. But if you like your mystery soaked in diesel and despair, this one's for you. Here's something else to chew on. Similar stories crop up now and then in maritime lore. Ghost ships, abandoned vessels, silent radios, and vanished crews. The sea is vast, and the line between myth and maritime mishap gets thin when the waves erase evidence faster than anyone can investigate. For every Mary Celeste, there's an Orang Medan only this time. No tidy cabin or folded laundry. Just dead men, a scream through static, and a vanishing act wrapped in smoke. Of course, there's always the possibility this entire story was a hoax, a propaganda piece, a wartime invention, a sailor's tale polished over decades. But even hoaxes say something about what scares us. Death without reason, abandonment, the feeling that something huge and dark is watching just below the surface, that even in our modern, mapped-out world, there are still... The Carol A. Deering wasn't supposed to become a legend. She was just a 5-masted schooner, built in 1919 and hauling coal up and down the east coast of the United States. Nothing fancy. Nothing cursed. Just solid American shipbuilding with a red hull and white sails until she drifted into maritime mystery on a winter morning in 1921 and never quite drifted back out. It was January 31st, and the lookout station at Cape Hatteras, North Carolina, spotted the Deering run aground on Diamond Shalsa, notoriously tricky stretch of shifting sandbars and strong currents known as the graveyard of the Atlantic. Hundreds of ships had gone down there before, but the Deering didn't sink. She perched strangely upright in the shallow waters, her sails ragged but still partially raised, her hull intact like she'd parked herself on purpose. When rescuers finally reached the vessel a few days later, bad weather had made it impossible to board sooner. They found something that turned an ordinary shipwreck into a mystery fit for a campfire. The ship was completely abandoned. No crew, no lifeboats. The wheel was shattered. The binnacle box, that's the compass housing, smashed. The galley looked like someone had been in the middle of preparing a meal. Personal belongings were left behind. The ship's logs and navigation equipment, gone. It was as if everyone had just stood up mid-shift, stepped into the lifeboats, and rode off into nowhere. And that's the heart of the puzzle. Where did they go? The Deering's last confirmed sighting was a few days before she ran aground. A lightship stationed at Cape Lookout had reported the schooner sailing past. A Manot, the captain, hailed the lightship and shouted that the vessel had lost its anchors. That in itself was weird, but things got weirder. The man didn't behave like an officer. He looked nervous. His tone was off. Suspicious. The lightship's crew later noted that he seemed to be avoiding radio contact, entirely an odd choice for a ship in distress. Then the Deering hits the shoals. Then no one's on board. Investigators immediately scrambled for answers, and the theories piled up fast. One of the first suspicions was mutiny. The Deering had sailed from Barbados en route to Norfolk, Virginia, and reports from the voyage suggest that tensions had flared between the captain, William Merritt, and some of his crew. Merritt had to leave the ship early in the voyage due to illness, and his replacement, Captain Wilby Wormelmay, have had difficulty asserting control over a crew that didn't sign on for him. Did the crew rebel, toss the officers overboard, and try to escape in the lifeboats? That leads to Theory 2, pirates. The Outer Banks had been largely free of swashbucklers since the 1700s, but in the early 20th century, prohibition was in full swing, and rum runners were no joke. Some investigators speculated that the Deering had been boarded by pirates modern ones who forced the crew off the ship. But if so, where were the bodies? The wreck hadn't been looted. And pirates, even practical ones, don't usually erase an entire crew without leaving a trace. Which brings us to Theory 3, communists. No, really. It was 1921, and post-World War I paranoia was high. The FBI actually considered whether left-wing agitators had infiltrated the crew and hijacked the ship as part of some secret plan to incite rebellion or supply Soviet allies. It sounds ridiculous now, but this was during the first Red Scare. And if there's one thing history teaches us, it's that when the facts get fuzzy, governments get imaginative. Of course, there's always the Bermuda Triangle theory, despite the fact that the Deering didn't technically disappear within the triangle's spooky little wedge of ocean. But that didn't stop the lore machine from pulling the case into the fold. Strange lights, sudden storms, vanishing Solorsets, the Bermuda Triangle starter pack. Some say the crew was abducted. Others say they were lured off by something inexplicable. There's even a theory involving a Sequoian underwater earthquake that could have damaged the ship's navigation gear and caused panic. The crew, in this scenario, thought the Deering was sinking and abandoned her in a rush. only to be swallowed up by the sea. This has a tinge of plausibility. But again, why no trace of lifeboats? No bodies, no flotsam, no debris. Then there's the most practical, least satisfying theory, that the ship hit rough weather, and the crew, already struggling with possible illness or low morale, made a series of bad choices. Maybe they tried to go ashore and were swept out. Maybe the captain was dead and the others didn't know what to do. Maybe the sea just won. Again. But something about the Deering's final moments resists neat answers. The folded linens, the abandoned meal, the missing logbooks, the eerie quiet. The way she just stood there, alone on the sandbar, like a ghost waiting for an audience. Whatever happened out there, it wasn't ordinary. It's the kind of mystery that doesn't just whisper from the pages of history, it lingers, like sea mist on your skin, refusing to explain itself. And maybe that's why the Carol A. Deering still haunts nautical lore today. It's not just the disappearance, it's the quiet, incomplete exit. No wreckage, no sign. Just an empty vessel with its sails frayed like the edges of a dream, beached where the ocean lost interest in finishing the story. The Kaz 2 wasn't supposed to become a mystery. It was a sleek, modern catamaran with GPS, a working radio, and every safety feature a well-organized sailing trip could ask for. 3 men boarded her in 2007. Derek Batten and brothers Peter and James Tunstead for what was meant to be a short, relaxed cruise along the Australian coast. The seas were calm. The weather was mild. It was the kind of journey you'd expect to end with drinks on the deck and maybe some sunburned regret. Instead, the Kaz 2 ended up drifting hundreds of miles without a soul aboard, its table still set for lunch, and its crew vanished like a ghost in flip-flops. It began on April 15, 2007, when the Kaz 2 left Eerily Beach in Queensland, headed for Townsville. The men weren't professional sailors, but they weren't clueless either. Derek Batten, the eldest at 56, was considered the most experienced of the 3, and the others had taken sailing courses. They'd done trips like this before. This wasn't a maiden voyage, it was more like a floating boys' weekend. 2 days later, on April 18, a Coast Watch aircraft spotted the Kaz 2 drifting near the Great Barrier Reef. No one responded to radio calls. That was the first red flag. A rescue vessel was sent out and eventually boarded the catamaran. That's where the story stopped being ordinary and started feeling like a deleted scene from a horror movie. The engine was still running. A laptop was open and turned on. A meal sat untouched on the table. A newspaper lay neatly folded beside it. One of the fishing lines had a lure still trailing in the water, like someone had just walked away from it for a moment. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no overturned chairs, nothing broken. It was as if the crew had stepped out for just a second and then never came back. The boat's GPS showed a strange, course-irregular turns and slowed movement, suggesting that something had started going wrong about 80 kilometers offshore. The eerie thing? All 3 men were experienced enough not to fall off a boat. At least, not all at once. And yet that's what must have happened, because there was no sign of foul play, no storm, no warning. Just missing men, one by one, like candles snuffed out in daylight. Authorities investigated every possibility. Did pirates hijack them? No signs of a struggle and no missing valuables. Were they drinking? Toxicology couldn't say, but nothing on board suggested a party gone sideways. Did they argue, fight, push someone overboard? Again, nothing. Not a single overturned cushion, no broken glass, no notes. Did they anchor and try to swim? No anchor had been dropped. And who leaves the motor running while they go for a dip? One of the leading theories, and by leading, we mean slightly more plausible than alien abduction, is that one of the brothers may have fallen overboard while fishing, possibly tangled in the line. The other jumped in to help. The third, in a rush to save both, may have forgotten to turn the boat off or deploy any flotation device, and the catamaran drifted away, slow and steady, leaving all three men behind in the wide, indifferent sea. It would have been quick, quiet, and deeply unfair. Still, the theory has holes. Why didn't anyone grab a life jacket? Why wasn't there a single call made over the radio? Why was the laptop open but untouched? GPS data never reviewed. No SOS signaled. And how could three people vanish in broad daylight with every modern convenience around them? There's something about modern ghost ship cases that hits harder than the old ones. Maybe because we believe we're past that kind of mystery. We've got satellite tracking, digital logs, constant communication. We think we've outgrown vanishings. But then the sea rolls its eyes, flips a page, and gives us the KZ proof that even now, even with every safety box checked, it can still open up and swallow a story whole. The KAZ-2 was eventually towed back to shore. Investigators combed it from bow to stern. Every log was read, every timestamp cross-referenced. Nothing. No smoking gun, no tearful goodbye recorded on a camcorder. The men's families were left with the unbearable ache of the unknown. There's grief in death. Yes, but there's a different kind of haunting. When no body is found, no fate is confirmed. Just silence, salt, and 1,000 possibilities that don't quite add up. To this day, the case of the KAZ-2 is considered closed, but never truly solved. The ocean doesn't keep receipts. It offers no conclusions. All we know for certain is that 3 men went to sea, and the sea came back without them, politely leaving everything else behind. Still humming, still warm, still waiting. The Joyita was never supposed to be famous. She was a workhorse, a sturdy wooden merchant vessel, with a name that meant Little Jewel in Spanish. Modest title for a boat that had already survived more than her fair share of misfortune. Built in 1931, she had served as a luxury yacht, a Navy patrol boat during World War II, and later a dependable cargo and passenger ship in the South Pacific. She was patched, repainted, reinforced, and repurposed more times than anyone could count. And then, on October 3, 1955, the Joyita left Samoa and vanished. She was due to travel from Apia to the Tokelau Islands, a 270-mile run carrying 25 people, 16 crew, 9 passengers. Alongside them were barrels of oil, sacks of flour, boxes of food, and, just to spice things up, a few crates of medical supplies, including some marked as radioactive. Just your average tropical supply run with a side order of danger. She never arrived. Days passed, then weeks. Rescue efforts scoured the route, but nothing turned up. The Joyita had vanished without a radio call, without a flare, without a whisper. People assumed the worst, that she had sunk suddenly and taken everyone with her. But then 5 weeks later, on November 10th, the Joyita was found, not at the bottom of the sea, but floating aimlessly more than 600 miles off course near Fiji. She was listing badly to one side, partially submerged. Her radios were busted. Her clocks had stopped at 10:25, and most importantly, she was empty. No crew, no passengers, no lifeboats, and much of the cargo gone. The inside was a mess. Blood-stained bandages were found on the deck. A doctor's bag was open. A makeshift sunshade made from canvas had been rigged across part of the deck. The logbook and all navigational equipment were missing. The engine was covered in mattresses for insulation, but it hadn't been running. There was a break in the flying bridge's windows, as if something had struck it, but otherwise there was no evidence of panic, no signs of violence. Just a boat half flooded and a silence thicker than seawater. The ship, oddly enough, was still buoyant. She had cork-lined compartments designed to keep her afloat even if badly damaged. That was the first big question. If she hadn't sunk and was clearly still afloat, why had everyone abandoned her? One theory suggests the ship's engine failed shortly after departure. A corroded pipe leaked water into the bilge, and the onboard pump, also broken, never cleared it. The radio's range had been reduced to 2 miles because someone had removed key fuses. Basically, they were floating, filling with water, and unable to call for help. Panic might have set in. The captain could have ordered everyone into lifeboats, fearing the ship would sink overnight. But that's where it gets weird, because none of the bodies or the lifeboats were ever found. And even if they'd fled the ship in fear, why not leave a message? Why take the doctor's bag, the logbook, the navigational tools? Why go so far, so fast, in the wrong direction? Another theory hints at piracy. Cargo was missing, perhaps stolen. But pirates in the South Pacific in 1955 weren't exactly common, and the ship wasn't valuable enough to draw professional raiders. Still, a cargo theft gone wrong is plausible. Someone boards, forces everyone off, sails away, then abandons the Joyita. It's just, if that's the case, it was done with surgical precision and 0 witnesses. There's also the grim possibility of internal conflict. The captain, Thomas Miller, was an experienced seaman, but he had a reputation for stubbornness. If the ship had begun to flood, some suggest there may have been a disagreement about what to do next. Did someone panic and convince the others to abandon ship? Did violence break out? Were the bloodied bandages a sign of an injury or something worse? Of course, it wouldn't be a maritime mystery without the tinfoil theories, aliens, government cover-ups, secret nuclear cargo, a mysterious fog, you name it. Someone suggested it. The radioactive medical crates didn't help. Plenty of people thought something strange was being smuggled. But even that can't explain the sheer stillness of the mystery, the total lack of trace. In the end, the Joyita was towed back to harbor and patched up again, because she refused to die. She was cleaned, repainted, and returned to service like nothing had happened. But the people who boarded her that day in 1955 were never seen again. No wreckage, no bones, no last messages in bottles. Just a floating ghost in the Pacific, partially underwater, quietly mocking our need for answers. She earned her place in maritime folklore, not because she was flashy or tragic, but because she was confusing, deeply, wonderfully, persistently confusing. A ship that shouldn't have been empty. A journey that shouldn't have ended in silence. A mystery wrapped in driftwood. The Joyita reminds us that the sea doesn't need a storm to take people. Sometimes it just waits, still and quiet, for one wrong decision or none at all, and then it rewrites the story without an ending. The High Aim 6 was not built to become legend. It was a practical vessel, a Taiwanese fishing boat registered in Indonesia, designed to haul in tuna and trawl open seas without fuss or fame. But in January 2003, it slipped from being just another ship into one of the ocean's eeriest mysteries, thanks to a vanished crew, a still-running engine, and some unsettlingly active phone signals long after everyone was gone. It all began on January 8, 2003, when the Australian Coast Guard spotted the High Aim 6 drifting near the coast of Broome, Western Australia. It was floating silently in open water. No distress signals, no emergency beacons, just a big industrial ship bobbing gently, like it had forgotten what it was doing. When boarded, inspectors found the engine humming contentedly. The GPS was still working. Fuel tanks were full. The ship's hold contained neatly packed fishing gear, a full freezer, and a stockpile of food in the galley. Nothing was damaged, burned, or bloodied. In fact, it looked like the crew had just stepped away for lunch. Except there was no one. Not a single soul on board. No signs of struggle. No evidence of mutiny or foul play. The lifeboats were untouched. All 10 crew members were just gone. The captain, Chen Tai-cheng, and his Indonesian crew had last been heard from on December 28, 2002, while sailing from Taiwan. They hadn't reported anything unusual. No mayday, no warnings. Then nothing. Silence. Until the ship turned up, sailing itself like a ghost with a destination only the sea understood. And then came the truly creepy part. In the weeks following the discovery, investigators learned that the cell phone belonging to one of the Indonesian crew members, Supriyono, had still been making calls. Not just random pings or accidental dials. Actual, billable, connected calls. One call had been made to Indonesia, weeks after the ship had been found adrift. The calls weren't long, and none were recorded, but they happened. That meant the phone hadn't just been on it, had been with someone, and it had been used. Cue the goosebumps. Theories swirled. Maybe pirates had hijacked the ship and dumped the crew at sea, but there were no signs of robbery, and no valuables were missing. Could the crew have staged a mutiny, thrown the captain overboard, and then jumped ship? Unlikely who abandons a fully stocked, perfectly functioning vessel in the middle of the ocean? Perhaps the most likely theory was this. The crew had killed the captain, possibly during an argument or dispute, and then tried to head for home, only to run into trouble, panic, or poor planning. Maybe they took a lifeboat, or were picked up by another vessel, hoping to disappear quietly. But if that's the case, why were there no signs of departure? Why didn't they scuttle the ship? Why didn't they take their belongings? Or at least make the escape look intentional? And again, what's with the phone? Indonesian police did eventually arrest one man, a former crew member who reportedly confessed to being part of a mutiny. He claimed the crew had turned on the captain, killed him, and abandoned the ship. But even that confession didn't tie up the mystery neatly. The man's version of events changed several times. Details were murky, and no physical evidence backed up his story. It was as if even he wasn't sure what really happened, or maybe didn't want to say. Meanwhile, the ship sat there, like a floating riddle. No storm damage, no tampering with the electronics, no scribbled note in a bottle. The world watched and collectively blinked, then turned the page, because there were no further developments. But some mysteries stick because they refuse to decay. They don't scream, they whisper. The High Aim 6 wasn't spectacular. It didn't explode, catch fire, or carry radioactive cargo. It was just off, a vessel drifting without its people, like a stage with all the props but no actors. And somewhere, one crewman's phone still rang for a little while longer, like the sea was pocket dialing the truth. The Jianseng didn't drift in like a ghost. It drifted in like a puzzle piece from the wrong box, a silent, rusting hulk off the coast of Queensland, Australia, spotted by a border patrol plane in 2006. No distress signal, no movement, no visible identification, no explanation, just a tanker-sized question mark on the waves. The ship, which would come to be known as the Jianseng, was first seen meandering about 180 kilometers west of the Waipa coast in the Gulf of Carpentaria. Australian maritime authorities approached it cautiously, boarding the vessel with expectations of either a crew in trouble or a smuggling operation gone weird. What they found instead was nothing. No one on board, no living soul, no skeletal remains, no frantic diary entries scratched into steel. The engine didn't work. The navigation equipment had been stripped. No ship's log, no country of origin, no flag, No nameplate, no markings on the hull. It was like the ship had woken up in the wrong ocean and forgotten who it was supposed to be. There was, however, one thing: rice. A lot of rice. Bags upon bags of rice, too much for just a crew, not enough for commercial delivery. It was speculated that it might have been intended for refueling or resupply of another vessel. So now, you've got an empty ship filled with bulk rice, floating thousands of kilometers off course. Totally normal. The vessel wasn't particularly old or new. Rust clung to its flanks like barnacles with opinions, but it wasn't beyond repair. The hull was intact, the structure seaworthy in theory. Yet it didn't seem to belong anywhere. There were no records in international databases, no identifying codes. It was like someone had built a full-size cargo ship, used it quietly off-grid for a while, then shrugged and left it bobbing around in the sea like a forgotten toy. Theories began stacking up like shipping containers. Was it a ghost ship used by smugglers who dumped it when it became inconvenient? A refueling vessel for illegal fishing fleets, quietly supporting unauthorized trawlers off the books? A decommissioned tanker being towed for scrap before it broke loose from its tugboat and drifted into official sightlines? The last idea, at least, had some logistical support. The tow line on the bow looked as if it had been severed or slipped, but even then, no one came forward to claim it. No shipping company filed a report. No tugboat captain admitted to losing a floating metal hotel. And the rice? Untouched. Not looted. Not scattered. Just there, patiently waiting. Eventually, Australian authorities decided the Jian Sung was too much of a mystery and too much of a liability. The ship was towed out to sea and deliberately scuttled, which is maritime speak for "we blew it up on purpose," with no clue where it came from, who owned it, or what it was doing. The ocean was deemed the only fitting grave. And that was the end of the Jian Sang's brief, baffling career as a ghost ship. But the mystery never fully sank. Unlike most maritime tales, which are usually drenched in tragedy or romance or curses, the Jian Sung had none of that. It didn't bleed or scream or moan. It just arrived without explanation and left with even less. No storm had tossed it. No pirates had bled on its deck. No stowaway scribbled warnings into bulkheads. Just a floating shell, stripped of identity and forgotten by history, drifting until someone noticed it, then vanishing again, this time under deliberate waves. So if you're ever walking a beach in northern Australia and you spot an unmarked bag of rice washed up on the shore, remember, the sea keeps its secrets. But occasionally, it tosses us a breadcrumb or a rice grain, just to remind us how little we know about what drifts beyond the horizon. In the long list of ghost ships that have drifted through maritime folklore, none wears the title quite as literally or stubbornly as the Bedtime. This steel-hulled cargo steamer wasn't just abandoned once and forgotten. No, the Bedtime decided that if it was going down, it was going to do it on its own terms, which apparently meant never. Launched in 1914 in Sweden, the Bedtime was a relatively modest cargo vessel designed for Arctic trade. By the 1920s, she'd been acquired by the Hudson's Bay Company, tasked with transporting pelts and goods between indigenous trading posts in the Canadian Northwest Territories and civilization. For years, she made her rounds with quiet efficiency. Then, in 1931, the Arctic decided to ruin everything. While on a supply run near Barrow, Alaska, early snowstorms froze the Bedtime solid in sea ice. This wasn't especially unusual in Arctic shipping. Sometimes a ship got stuck. The crew hunkered down and waited for a thaw, grumbling into their soup. But the storm didn't let up, and the ice didn't crack. Eventually, the Hudson's Bay Company sent a rescue plane and evacuated the crew, leaving just a skeleton team behind to monitor the vessel in case she broke free. She did, and then she didn't. On October 8th, 1931, the Bechimo vanished from her icy parking spot during a blizzard. The remaining crew assumed she had sunk beneath the pressure of the shifting ice. They grieved her, held their breath, and then were startled when she popped up again about 45 miles away, looking smugly intact. They retrieved what cargo they could and officially abandoned the ship, assuming the Arctic would finish the job nature had clearly begun. But the Arctic, it turned out, had other plans. Over the next few decades, the Bechimo refused to die. She drifted through the Beaufort Sea like a haunted house on vacation. Eskimo hunters spotted her, passed her tails around the fire. She would be seen floating silently along the horizon, sometimes grounded in shallow ice, sometimes free to roam, always eerily intact. People would board her out of curiosity. Occasionally, small salvage teams would attempt to tow her back or strip her for parts, only to be beaten back by the weather or the ship's apparent refusal to cooperate. In 1933, a group of Alaskan villagers even used her for shelter during a brutal storm, making her perhaps the most reluctant Airbnb in history. She wasn't malevolent, just impossible to get rid of. No matter how many storms she endured or how many years passed, she just kept showing up, unmanned, empty. Rusted, sure, but never fully surrendered. She became a legend among Arctic seafarers. A ghost that didn't moan or drift with candles in the porthole, just a steel husk riding ice like it had a destination only it knew. The last confirmed sighting came in 1969, 38 years after she'd first been left to the mercy of the elements. A passing crew saw her calmly lounging in pack ice, like an aging polar bear. And then nothing. No one's seen the Bechimo since. Maybe she finally sank beneath the waves, heavy with rust and reputation. Maybe she's frozen in a glacier somewhere, waiting for climate change to set her free again. Or maybe she's still out there, sliding between floes under cloudy Arctic skies, daring another unlucky sailor to spot her. For decades, efforts were made to track her final resting place. No luck. The Canadian government even mounted search missions, hoping to find what had become of the most persistent ship in modern maritime history. But as of now, there's no wreckage, no grave, just stories. There's something almost poetic about it. In an age where satellites can track a coffee mug from orbit, the Bechimo remains stubbornly analog. A relic of the industrial age with the attitude of a ghost floating through the most unforgiving waters on Earth like a rumor that refuses to die. And if you ever find yourself sailing off the Alaskan coast in the late afternoon fog, and you think you see a shape in the mist, something with smokestacks and a hollow deck, something too quiet and too still, don't worry. You're probably not hallucinating. It might just be the Bechimo, still doing laps, still avoiding retirement, still waiting for someone brave you're foolish enough to climb aboard. Just don't expect her to stay in one place. Commitment was never really her thing. Strange part, we've never found any bodies. Archaeologists have uncovered pristine rooms, walls decorated with vivid scenes, pottery sitting right where someone left it. Yet there are no skeletons frozen mid-run, no mass graves, no signs of people being caught by surprise. It's as if everyone packed up and left just in time. This detail sets Akrotiri apart from Pompeii. its more famous Roman cousin. Where Pompeii's destruction was sudden and deadly, Akrotiri's seems more organized. Like they saw the warning signs, earthquakes, rumbling, smoke, and decided to leave before things got biblical. And while the ash preserved their homes and furniture, it preserved no hint of where they went. They vanished, orderly and entire, into history's blind spot. The city they left behind is stunning. Multi-story buildings with balconies, drainage systems that still make engineers nod in approval. Bright frescoes showing monkeys, birds, fish, and women with elaborate curls and jewelry. These weren't crude islanders, these were cosmopolitan people connected by trade routes to Egypt, Mesopotamia, and beyond. They lived with color, with ritual, with a strong sense of design and balance. And then the volcano cracked that balance open like an egg. Akrotiri's destruction had ripple effects far beyond its shores. The Minoan civilization, centered on nearby Crete, began to decline not long after. Whether it was because of tsunamis wiping out ports, or shifts in trade caused by the fallout, or just the psychological impact of watching your neighbors get erased by fire and ash, something broke. The powerful thalassocracy, sea empire that had dominated the region for centuries, faded, leaving room for new players like the Mycenaeans to rise. And now we get to the spicy part, Atlantis. For centuries, people have speculated that Akrotiri was the inspiration for Plato's legendary tale of a sunken civilization, a place of beauty and knowledge punished by the gods and swallowed by the sea. Sure, Plato set Atlantis in the Atlantic Ocean and dated its fall thousands of years before Akrotiri, but the details? Advanced society, sudden destruction, lost beneath the waves. It all lines up a little too well. It's tempting to believe, to think that maybe, just maybe, the story of Atlantis wasn't entirely made up. That it was a garbled memory of Akrotiri's final day, passed down across generations and cultures, until it became a myth so big it outgrew its origins. Maybe. But even if Akrotiri isn't Atlantis, it doesn't need to be. Its story is rich enough on its own, a snapshot of what life looked like when people lived well, thought deeply, and built beautifully. And then watched it all disappear beneath something older and angrier than any empire, the earth itself. Today, the ruins of Akrotiri are open to visitors. You can walk past perfectly preserved walls, look at staircases that still hold their shape, and see pottery that waited millennia to be uncovered. It feels like a place paused mid-sentence, like someone's about to walk back in with a basket of olives and a story to tell. But no one ever comes. Because Akrotiri didn't fall to invaders or plagues. It fell to the sky, to magma and ash, and the violent memory of a planet that occasionally reminds us who's in charge. And the people who lived there, well, they disappeared without a trace, leaving behind their paintings, their plumbing, and a mystery wrapped in volcanic silence. The Roanoke colony was supposed to be a new beginning, the English crown's first serious attempt at establishing a foothold in the New World. It had all the ingredients for colonial legend: brave settlers, hostile landscapes, supply ships braving the Atlantic, and just enough tension to keep things interesting. But what makes Roanoke unforgettable isn't what happened while the colony was alive, it's what happened when it wasn't. Or rather, what didn't happen. In 1587, about 115 colonists arrived on Roanoke Island, off the coast of what's now North Carolina. Led by John White, a seasoned explorer and artist, they were part of an ambitious plan to plant an English presence in the Americas, and hopefully not starve or get immediately wiped out. Among the settlers was White's daughter, Eleanor Dare, who gave birth to Virginia Dare, the first English child born in the New World. It was a promising start. But almost immediately, the colony struggled. Supplies ran low. Relations with local indigenous groups were strained at best, fatal at worst. So just months after landing, White sailed back to England for reinforcements. He promised to return quickly, bring food, tools, reinforcements. You know, dad things, colonial governor things. He did not return quickly. What was supposed to be a few months turned into 3 years, thanks to the small inconvenience of the Anglo-Spanish War. England needed every available ship to fend off the Spanish Armada, and John White's resupply mission was repeatedly delayed. When he finally returned to Roanoke in August 1590, it wasn't to cheers or parades. It was to nothing. The colony was empty. No people, no bodies, no buildings, really just some dismantled structures and a defensive palisade. No signs of violence, no signs of panic, no messages scrawled in desperation. Well, there was one message. Carved into the palisade was the word Croton, and nearby, etched into a tree, simply Crow. White had told the settlers that if they had to relocate, they should carve their destination somewhere visible. If they were in danger, they were to carve a cross above the name. There was no cross. So maybe they'd gone to Croatoan Island, known today as Hatteras Island, home to a friendly native group that had helped previous settlers. Logical enough. But when White sailed there to investigate, a storm turned him back. He never returned to the New World, and Roanoke, as a functioning colony, was never seen again. Which brings us to the mystery. What happened to those 115 people? Did they really just pack up and leave? Did they assimilate peacefully with the Croatoan people? Were they killed in a conflict that left no archaeological trace? Did they head inland, get lost in the forest, and vanish into the folds of time? Theories have multiplied like rabbits in the centuries since. One popular idea is that the colonists integrated with local tribes that they intermarried, adopted new customs, and essentially stopped being English colonists and started being something else entirely. There have been tantalizing but inconclusive reports over the years of indigenous communities with gray eyes or surnames like Dare and White, but nothing definitive. Other theories veered darker: disease, starvation, or attacks from less friendly tribes. Some think the colonists tried to sail back to England and were lost at sea. There are even stories of secret massacres and cover-ups, because if there's an unsolved mystery in early American history, there's probably a conspiracy theory hanging out nearby. More recently, archaeologists have found clues: broken pottery shards, signs of European-style housing in unexpected places. There's evidence to suggest that at least some of the colonists moved inland, perhaps splitting into smaller groups, but definitive answers remain frustratingly out of reach. Roanoke's enduring power isn't in what we know, but in what we don't. There's something inherently unsettling about a group of people, families, children, a newborn baby vanishing so thoroughly that all that's left is a word scratched into wood. No goodbyes, no bones. Just Croton, like a cryptic post, it note left for a rescue team that arrived too late. And maybe that's why the story still haunts the American imagination. It's not just a colonial footnote. It's an origin myth with a hole in the middle. The kind of mystery that invites you to fill it in with your own fears or hopes. They were lost. They were saved. They became something new. Or they were swallowed up by a continent that didn't ask for them and didn't leave a trail. The lost colony of Roanoke wasn't the end of English colonization, of course. Jamestown followed, then Plymouth, then the whole complicated mess that eventually became a nation. But Roanoke was the first try, and its silence echoes louder than any success story. In the end, Roanoke may have been a warning, a whisper from the edge of a new world saying, "You're not in charge here." And that, maybe more than any carved word, is what was really left behind. In the heart of Central Asia, across the deserts and steppe and between jagged mountains, the bones of cities lie scattered in the dust. Not just villages, but full civilizations, marketplaces, mosques, libraries, gardens. Merv, Nishapur, Samarkand, Balkh, Khiva, and a dozen others once hummed with the music of merchants and the scratch of scribes. These weren't outposts or border towns. These were jewels, luminous cities along the Silk Road, gleaming hubs where cultures collided and trade transformed empires. And now? Now they're mostly wind, rubble, and names in the footnotes of forgotten history. Take Merv, for instance. Located in present-day Turkmenistan, Merv was once among the largest cities in the world. Not poetic exaggeration, actual, head-counted greatness. Around the 12th century, it may have held over 500,000 people. It had aqueducts, domes that glittered in the sun, and a library that drew scholars like moths. The Seljuk Empire made it their capital. Poets wrote verses under the moonlight by candle in courtyards. It was a place so rich and bustling that when Genghis Khan's son Tolui showed up in 1221, he reportedly asked for a census. Then he ordered the entire city to be slaughtered. That's not hyperbole. Historical sources claim that after the Mongols took the city, they murdered every man, woman, and child, somewhere between 300,000 and 1 million people, depending on which terrified scribe you believe. The irrigation system was destroyed. The libraries burned. The city was reduced to dust, brick by brick, soul by soul. Merv never really recovered. Today, you can visit the site. It's mostly desert and low mounds, the outlines of greatness smeared across the ground like a ghost's shadow. Then there's Nishapur, in modern Iran, which was almost as prosperous a key node in the Silk Road network, famous for turquoise, poetry, and the brilliance of its artisans. It was the birthplace of Omar Khayyam, mathematician and poet of the Rubaiyat fame. The city had great domes, palaces, madrasas, and ceramic production that rivaled anything in China. And then the Mongols came here too. After the death of Genghis Khan's general in Nishapur, the Mongols, in a particularly poetic act of rage, leveled the entire city and massacred its population. Even the cats and dogs, if the legends are to be believed. It was later rebuilt, sort of, but never with the same shine. Earthquakes helped finish the job, shaking apart what war hadn't already crushed. Why did these cities die? It wasn't just Mongols, although they certainly hit hard. Earthquakes regularly battered the region. River systems shifted. Irrigation canals silted up. Empires rose and fell. The Silk Road, once a superhighway of ideas and silk and spices, was eventually replaced by sea trade. Why risk crossing bandit-haunted deserts when you could sail? And some of it, frankly, is just the entropy of civilization. Even great cities crumble when the world moves on. Central Asia's ghost cities weren't wiped away all at once, like Pompeii. They faded. Populations dwindled. Sand filled the courtyards. The books were eaten by time. And eventually, the music stopped. There's something particularly eerie about how complete the disappearance was. Many of these cities were so important in their day that entire kingdoms revolved around them, and now they barely earn a sentence in most history textbooks. Sometimes the silence is physical, the wind brushing against crumbling walls, the sound of your own footsteps echoing through ruins. Sometimes it's in the maps, seeing the dot labeled ancient city in the middle of a nowhere landscape, with no highway, no airport, no sign of modernity. And yet, they mattered. Merv and Nishapur were fonts of scholarship and creativity, when London was a swamp and Paris was a muddy village. They preserved the knowledge of the ancient world, transmitted mathematics and medicine across continents, built observatories, trained astronomers, and translated the stars into meaning. Their influence rippled outward, shaping everything from Renaissance philosophy to algebra, and then they vanished, not into fire and apocalypse, but into history's blind spot. Today, archaeologists still dig. Tourists, the brave, the curious, the heat-tolerant wander the ruins with cameras and sunburns. Somewhere beneath the layers of sand and stone are old coins, shattered tiles, skeletons with stories still stuck to their bones. We try to piece them together, but it's like listening to an orchestra through a broken radio. The cities didn't just collapse. They were swallowed, first by invaders, then by time, and now by our own forgetting. But under the right light, with the right breeze, you can almost see the shadows moving again. A camel caravan entering the gate, a boy splashing water in a fountain, a merchant counting coins at sunset. It's all still there, just buried beneath the dust of 100 silent silk roads. The cities of the Indus Valley don't get the same blockbuster attention as ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, but they absolutely should. Around 2500 BCE, while the Nile and Tigris were still testing early pyramids and ziggurats, the Indus Valley was quietly crushing it. Massive cities like Mohenjo-daro, Lothal, and Dholavira stretched across what is now Pakistan and western India, intricately planned, impressively clean, and bafflingly ahead of their time. And then, somewhere around 1900 BCE, they were gone. Not destroyed in fire, not conquered, not even slowly decaying, just emptied out, stopped, like someone hit pause and never came back. Let's start with Mohenjo-daro, which translates to Mound of the Dead, because of course it does. At its peak, it may have supported around 40 people, all living in a city with grid-planned streets, standardized brickwork, and what's widely considered the earliest known system of indoor plumbing. We're talking working sewers, water storage tanks, and even a giant public bath at the center of the city. Their building codes were better than some modern towns, and yet, no palaces, no obvious temples, no grand statues proclaiming who was in charge. It's as if the people here decided that the city itself was the power. And then it was over. Lothal, further south, was a thriving port. That's right, these folks had maritime trade before we were supposed to have maritime trade. Lothal had a dockyard connected to rivers and the Arabian Sea. It exported beads, pottery, and maybe even cotton to Mesopotamia and Egypt. Their craftsmanship was exquisite. Their urban layout was precise. They even had a stormwater drainage system. But eventually, Lothal dried up literally. The port silted over, the water receded, and the city faded into the salt-tinged dust. Then there's Dholavira, perched on what was once an island in the Great Rann of Kutch. This city had layered zones, an upper city, middle city, and lower city, each with its own style of reservoirs and water conservation. Rainwater harvesting? Check. Multi-level defense walls? Check. An early understanding of how to survive in an arid, inhospitable place? Triple check. Dholavira was less about conquest and more about sustainability. And yet, like its siblings, it too eventually unraveled. So what happened? Well, no one knows for sure, but the leading theory is a slow-motion environmental disaster. Evidence suggests the mighty rivers that fed these cities, especially the once massive Sarasvati and Ghaggar Hakra, began to shift or dry up entirely. Climate change may have played a role, triggering long-term droughts that made agriculture unsustainable. If the monsoons failed and the rivers changed course, the entire backbone of Indus Valley life would have cracked. You can't trade if you can't irrigate. You can't irrigate if there's no water. Add to that tectonic activity, some geologists believe earthquakes may have helped redirect rivers or damage critical infrastructure. In a region built around precise hydrology, a few good shakes could have changed everything. What makes the disappearance of these cities so strange is how peaceful it appears. There's no archaeological evidence of mass slaughter, no burnt layers, no walls breached by invaders. Instead, the cities seem to have been abandoned gradually, their populations dispersing like morning fog. Some may have migrated east toward the Ganges plain, blending into new cultures, leaving their bricks and plumbing behind. And yet, for all their sophistication, the Indus Valley left almost no written record we can understand. Their script, dozens of tiny inscriptions carved onto seals and pottery, remains undeciphered. Unlike the Rosetta Stone that cracked Egyptian hieroglyphs, we have no bilingual artifact to unlock the Indus code. So we don't know what they called themselves. We don't know who ruled, or how, or what they believed. We're left with silence, beautiful, brick-shaped silence. And maybe that's what makes these lost cities feel so ghostly. We can map their streets and marvel at their engineering, but we can't hear their voices. It's like walking through the skeleton of a civilization that chose to vanish with dignity. No flames, no glory, no carved warnings to future generations. Just a slow fading into the background noise of time. Today, the sites are archaeological treasures. Mohenjo-daro, though endangered by waterlogging and neglect, still draws visitors willing to brave the heat. Lothal's dockyard lies quietly in the dry basin where water once flowed. Dholavira has been granted UNESCO World Heritage status, a fitting nod to a city that was way ahead of its time and too smart to stick around for the collapse. The Indus Valley people didn't leave us epic poems or tombs of gold. They left us bricks, drains, and questions. And somehow, that's even more haunting. Because it means they weren't trying to impress the future. They were just trying to live well. Then one day, they stopped. And the world forgot until the archaeologists came digging and realized they'd stumbled onto one of history's most elegant vanishing acts. Port Royal was never meant to be a respectable place. That was kind of the point. Perched on a thin spit of land along Jamaica's southern coast, it was the 17th century equivalent of a Vegas Bahamas mashup, but louder, drunker, and significantly more armed. This was where pirates came to party, where rum was cheaper than water, and where your average tavern probably had a punch bowl, a brothel in the back, and at least 3 outlaws negotiating stolen Spanish silver over a dice game. It wasn't just lawless, it was lavishly lawless. England, needing a buffer against the Spanish in the Caribbean, had quietly encouraged privateers to use Port Royal as a home base. The city thrived on looted gold, human trafficking, smuggling, and every other economic activity that made polite society clutch its pearls. And for a while, it worked. Port Royal became one of the wealthiest cities in the New World, with 4 times as many drinking establishments as churches, and reportedly 1 drinking house for every 10 residents. Not that most of them were upright citizens. This was a place where pirates like Henry Morgan went from rum-stained plunderers to knights of the British Empire, proof that even in the 1600s, if you stole big enough, someone would call you a hero. But then came June 7th, 1692. It was late morning. The sun was hot. The harbor was crowded. People were going about their usual business, selling fish, sharpening swords, drinking themselves into oblivion. And then the ground began to shake. What followed wasn't just an earthquake. It was a total urban exorcism. The 7.5 magnitude quake struck directly beneath the city. Buildings collapsed instantly. The soft, sandy peninsula that Port Royal was built on, essentially a giant sandbox, held together with rum and pirate hubris, began to liquefy. That's not metaphor. The ground literally turned to soup. Entire streets sank into the sea. Taverns, warehouses, private homes, whole blocks just slid sideways into the water like cocktail trays off a sinking ship. Witnesses described horrifying scenes. People vanishing as the earth opened beneath them. Coffins from the city's overcrowded graveyard surfacing and floating past survivors. And a wall of seawater sweeping through what remained. In under 3 minutes, 2/3 of Port Royal was gone. Around 0 people died immediately, with hundreds more succumbing to injuries, disease, or sheer bad luck in the days that followed. Of the survivors, many saw it not as a disaster, but as divine punishment. Preachers conveniently alive and suddenly very loud declared the earthquake a judgment from God on the city's sin. The idea stuck. The wickedest city on earth had been judged and found wanting. Port Royal slid into legend, just as it had slipped into the sea. But divine wrath wasn't the only explanation. The real culprit was poor engineering and worse planning. Port Royal had been built hastily on sand and silt, with few foundations and no idea what might happen during a major quake. The liquefaction, where solid ground suddenly turns liquid under stress, was textbook geological karma. The only thing surprising is that it didn't happen sooner. Today, the ruins of Port Royal still lie beneath the shallow, murky waters off the Jamaican coast. Archaeologists have recovered tankards, coins, clay pipes, and even an entire pocket watch frozen at the exact time the city began to die, 11:43 a.m. The watch's glass face was intact. Its owner was not. There's something fitting about how Port Royal ended. Fast, loud, chaotic. The city didn't fade away with time or decay into ruin. It got swallowed whole, as if the earth itself got tired of its nonsense. It was an apocalypse tailor-made for its inhabitants, dramatic, soaked in salt water, and ending in a drinking story nobody lived to tell. Jamaica never really rebuilt Port Royal as it was. The British tried to re-establish it as a naval base, But it was never again a place of wealth and pleasure. Hurricanes hit it. Fires scorched it. Another earthquake hit in the 20th century just to make sure it stayed humble. These days, it's a sleepy town with some dive bars, a naval dockyard, and a history that's mostly underwater. And yet, Port Royal endures not in bricks and mortar, but in every romanticized image of pirates swilling grog, shouting over sea shanties, and living large on stolen time. It's the blueprint for every drunken sailor fantasy and every fictional pirate's lawless utopia. Except it was real. And for about 30 glorious, raucous years, it was the center of the Caribbean's pirate heartbeat right up until the moment the sea took it back.